Here.
Howard. Kerwin. Here. McGinnis. Here. Slater.
Here.
Quorum present. You see the schedule in front of us, and that's a tentative time schedule.
Yeah.
We can adapt, it can be shorter. Notice I didn't say longer.
Good.
Okay. The first item is rules of procedure for the city council. And in front of you, we have a yellow paper as well as the one that we received in a kit. And the yellow one in front of us has things in red that came from Tony Bartholomew, right? And the blue is from Robin Beltramini. Suggestions, and any other suggestions, of course, that people have. And I thought if council agrees that we should go through one by one each item to see, we don't have to change all of them, but it's rather than skipping around. So the first one is the appointment. Good evening. Is the appointment of the mayor pro tem, the elected by council from among the members annually in November. Anybody satisfied with that one? Okay. To the designation of the acting mayor. Anybody want to do any changes on that one? Okay. The third one is special meetings, and under special meetings there are sections A through E. Now, I have a question on this one. Is it required to have this section be this lengthy and this wordy? Mr. Bartholomew? Do we have to have all these sections in there?
No, actually, what this does is you don't need any of this. This is to clarify charter language or to change the way that Robert's Rules works with this body. And this would be a deviation or a further explanation, but it's not needed, it's what you desired, and it's a clarifier. So it will set precedents, but it's not the formal guiding document, it's a clarifier.
Okay. Do you folks feel that we need to have the special meetings delineated this much? Does anybody have a problem with that? Councilwoman Beltramini?
I think it is much easier for people to look at this document and understand what kinds of special meetings there are and what the process is, if this is laid out this way. Necessary? No. Helpful? Yes. I do have a question though. Particularly if we're going to leave it like this. D, order of business. E says see Charter Article 6. There are no articles in the Charter, so I want to know where that came from and what it is. And it wasn't a change, it's just, okay, now that we're studying this, I think go. And I could not find amendments and additions to the agenda in the Charter anywhere. So, I didn't know where to look for it, evidently. So I don't know what I said.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, that's why I asked about this section, because there are several things in here that, yes, it does explain when we do a special meeting, but that section needs to be clarified. And also, too, if we want to do anything with amendments, additions to the agenda.
If I may, it really is section 4.3, business at special meetings, that requires the vote of the members. So that could be a typo. Section 4.3 really does govern that.
So it should say, see Charter Section 4.3 instead of Article 6. Correct?
wouldn't it be better to add that clarification under E, amendments and additions to the agenda?
Isn't that what she was saying? Change?
Well, but,
I've got the yellow sheet here. I go ahead and go. Wait.
see, in essence, D and E are duplicative.
Mm-hmm. Not in the yellow.
Yes, because items not indicated in the motion call of the meeting would be an addition or amendment to the agenda. So if you strike E or D and cover the clarification from the charter on how those amendments are made, I think would make it much clearer than adding a separate line here that makes people think that there's another way to do this, when there really is only one way to add to the agenda.
If I may, D is the actual way that the agenda looks.
Right.
So it would be more appropriate to leave it under D, I would believe, than it would be to have a standalone E. So if we incorporated E
That's
into
fine.
D.
However you want to do it, but I think they're duplicative.
Council?
Herman?
Kind of looking at, I know we're down at D and E, but I was really looking at the B under posting of both the special meeting or the study session. And it has to do with the agenda, and I was wondering if perhaps one way to deal with amendments, additions to agenda might be to include other. I know that we have come to be at some of our meetings and realize that we can't talk about anything else, even though it may be something happening in the community as an other item. And I know that many other governing bodies use simply the term other. It's not the idea that they would bring in something huge, like privatizing DPW or something like that. It would be the idea of just the ability to mention something that was pertinent. But at this point, we have it enabled, even in response to citizen comments or something like that. So I was hoping that other might be included. Oh, you're shaking your head before I finish.
The section 4.3 indicates that the purpose of the meeting must be in the call. And the purpose of other is not definitive enough to meet section 4.3 of the charter.
What I was wondering, Ms. Bartholomew or Madam Mayor, was that when we declare the meeting, in fact, and call for that meeting, that we would cover this item, the budget, and other, that wouldn't be declarative enough in what I read. Are you nodding that it is?
Madam
Is
Mayor,
it? Yes, and
no,
then
I think if you just use the word other, then it is not explicit enough. The purpose of special meeting calls is to provide the public, because it's not the normal time. So if you have something in advance of the meeting and it goes out, then certainly can be added there. But if you just want...
There needs a translation here. We're missing
Okay.
something translation. Ms. Beltramini, I think, will translate.
Councilman Beltrame?
If I understand what Mary's saying, is would other, in the call to the meetings, allow us the opportunity to answer an extraneous citizen question, get a report from management on something else? Or is that something that we absolutely cannot do under any circumstances other than by unanimous vote of adding something to the agenda at the meeting?
Yeah.
I don't care. Somebody.
Yeah, and I did understand the question, and the answer is no. It's too general. I know that there's that desire. Certainly, it would be helpful to have that ability, but because it's a special meeting, you really do need to provide in advance what action is going to be occurring. And that's pursuant to section 4.3 of the charter. So if you just allow for other, it's too general.
Well, maybe we could take a look at 4.3 in the charter, because that would be helpful.
And Madam Mayor, I do have the language if you'd like me
Yes,
to
it's
read
right.
it.
We have it in our binders here, too.
Yeah, I read it in advance.
Okay?
Go ahead.
And it says, "No business shall be transacted at any special meeting of the council unless the same has been stated in the notice of such meeting. However, any business which may lawfully come before a regular meeting may be transacted at a special meeting if all of the members of council present consent thereto, and all of the members file their written consent.
So my question is, if it were stated in the notice, is that not keeping in compliance with that specific charter language? That was my original question.
But Councilwoman Kerwin, if it's going to be provided in the notice, then it's something we know about ahead of time, and it would be stated in the call for the meeting specifically. And if it's something that comes up between the call for the meeting and the meeting, then the only way we could discuss it would be if we all agree that it could come and we agree to it, correct?
Correct. And I
Why
guess.
does it have to be file written consent? You mean we have to sign that night that we've all agreed?
Yes, Mayor, and we have done that before.
Right.
There's been one occasion that I
Right.
can recall where we did have an item that needed to be discussed, and because we had all of the members of council present, we were able to do that.
Okay.
If you have one member absent, it's not a possibility to add anything to the agenda unless you have that consent in advance. And maybe if I can just follow up and just make sure. Your request is to have an item on the special meeting agenda that says other. Okay, and that's what's just not specific enough.
Okay. But according to this, and we would call it E, amendments addition to agenda, that at that meeting, should something come up, that this little language here, amendments additions to agenda, would be enough for 4.3, compliance with 4.3.
You would need to have the consent, the written consent of all of the members, and that can be accomplished at the meeting, but we would need to have that on file. We would keep that on file just to assure that there's compliance with the charter.
That was my question regarding posting and the agenda and posting.
Okay. All right, any other in that particular section? Okay. Rick? Yes.
Just-
Mayor Pro Tem Fleming?
Just a point of clarification. So what we're deciding to do under D, order of business, is to eliminate the E at this point and move that to D and make public comment E and adjournment F?
No,
Is that what we're talking about doing? Is
no, I thought they were referring, they're gonna take out the wording. Are you taking out the wording Article 6 and putting in section 4.3?
Just clarifying what D.
Mayor, I think you can accomplish it by adding to D, adding section 4.3 to the end of that, and then eliminating E completely, and then moving F up to E and G up to
yeah,
F.
Okay.
that's what I thought.
Mhm.
Okay,
Okay,
that's got it.
so you're gonna have the reference to section, Mrs. Blum?
But then when you
I
flip
thought
the
it-
page, there's a section E.
Right,
Mm-hmm.
My understanding was that we were gonna incorporate this E into this D.
Right.
So then that also will be merged in, correct?
That whole thing.
okay,
It helps to explain the mechanism.
all right. Okay, regular
Move to
meet,
D.
okay, regular meetings, and changes there. Agenda, regular meeting agenda, and closed session agenda. Pardon?
Closed session.
B, closed session agenda, Councilwoman Kerwin?
I would like to simply be compliant with MCL 15.268E and skip all of the name things. I don't know when we started including specific names, but I just assume be compliant with the act.
Mrs. Blum?
Mayor, the reason why we do this, we include more than what's actually required under the Open Meetings Act, is because we did have a lawsuit where we were directed to do that. It was several years ago, and the judge did direct us to include the name of the case. So because of that, we've inserted the language. So yes, it does exceed what's required under the Open Meetings Act, but because we have personally been the subject of a lawsuit, we have chosen to err on the side of being very conservative, and we do incorporate that in the language. Now, it does not necessarily have to be included in the rules of procedure, but I recommend that you do keep it there because then you don't lose it. I mean, we certainly do that now, and we will continue to do that, but, you know, this way, it's certain that future councils will also remember that's there and required.
Have there been complaints from people whose names have been listed? I'm wondering if the reverse, someone complained that it wasn't specifically identified, but I know that if you Google up a name, that name will come, because in fact there's been a suit brought, and I don't know. That's why I'd be far more comfortable going with what the act requires to protect people.
Do we want to give council a copy of that ruling from the judge so they could see what was actually said?
I'm happy to do that
Okay.
if council desires to have it. I'll be able to retrieve that document. As far as whether or not there is it's the reverse, and there is no reverse cause of action under FOIA. So there's no liability for us disseminating that information. However, there may be individuals who don't wish to have that disclosed, but there's no cause of action against the city for disclosure of it.
Okay. That explains it.
Any other questions on that section?
How did the collective bargaining unit come to be in there as well?
Madam Mayor, that is
Yeah.
not specifically included in the order. The order was specific to, if I recall correctly, and it's been many years since we've had that case, but the collective bargaining unit was something I believe that was added again to provide uniformity, that we would identify that. It's not necessarily required by the Open Meetings Act.
And I might suggest just striking that one if that's one that could be struck.
Mayor Pro Tem Conley?
I think we talk a lot about being transparent and being open, and I think that plays right into that. I like it the way it is, because this way we're being transparent and open. Everybody knows what the meeting's about, whether it's a regular meeting agenda or a closed session agenda. So I think we should leave it the way it is, to just be transparent.
In response, it was a time recently, you may recall, Councilmember Fleming, where you really wanted to talk about a number of different bargaining units, and yet we were kind of in a bind about doing that without going through and trying to identify and name them all. So to go in to discuss collective bargaining, in fact, wouldn't have played out like that at all. So I think that it might, we know we're going in to discuss collective bargaining, it's in compliance with the Open Meetings Act. I think that it simply might give that.
I'll go along with what majority council wants. I just thought it would be more transparent.
When it's specifically listed and certain units are mentioned, then we can only discuss those particular
That's
ones.
true.
That was the advice we were given that night. If it just said going into closed session to discuss collective bargaining, then we could discuss any of those. So it's up to
Which seemed to be the
council.
desire of
Yeah.
that night.
Councilman Slater?
Isn't this where a closed session is requested by a collective bargaining
Yes,
unit? That's different.
yes.
I think if the collective bargaining unit is requesting the closed session, that's different. And that we should know who is.
Right, and then we list it.
Is that
Mr.
different?
Zerlag?
Is that
Well, it's
different?
always in my understanding that city management requests a closed session to discuss collective bargaining, because I don't think ASME or the TPOA would request a closed session to meet with the Troy City Council. That's
Right.
against our protocol that we've established.
That's not what
The
this
bargaining
says.
unit does not request to meet with the city council.
But that's not what this says.
Mrs. Bloom?
Actually, Mayor, perhaps instead of the word of, perhaps it should say for, if you choose to keep that in there.
Good point.
Pardon?
Good.
Okay.
I
Um,
would
It's
just
not a
as soon
small
strike
Yes.
font,
it.
so I can-
Pardon?
I would just as soon strike it. Stay in compliance with the act, not.
Well, you mean strike that particular section? Because Mrs. Bloom has already explained that if a specific name is pursuant, we have to do that because of the ruling that the judge gave.
That's only for excuse me, Ms. Bloom, did you not say that this is not required and there's been no ruling under this collective bargaining?
Yes, again, to the best of my recollection, the last sentence could be stricken if that is the desire of a majority of council.
Okay. Folks want to indicate, Mrs. Beltran, Councilwoman Beltran?
I think that the people of Troy expect us to be consistent whenever possible. And so if we're going into a closed session, if we are doing something that warrants that, the people of Troy deserve a reason other than some umbrella, some section in the act. I think that if somebody sued us, they deserve to know that. If somebody's asked for a special meeting about a contract, they deserve to know that. I don't have a problem with it the way it is. And it is still compliant with the act.
Anybody else? Councilman Slider?
I'm thinking that there's a reason that it's here. And maybe we've been here long enough to know why, but I believe there's got to be a reason why it's here, or it wouldn't be there.
Mrs. Blum, do you have a?
Again, I believe that it was just to be consistent, and because we were providing it for the case names, we again wanted the transparency of providing any collective bargaining unit. It's been done for several years, and I believe, again, this is going back some years now, but I do believe that they were both added at the same time.
Anybody else? Councilwoman McGinnis?
You don't have to tend to lean on the side of leaving it the way that it's at. Obviously, as long as we're not precluded from calling a closed session that would include more than one, so that we can talk about more than one in terms of looking at a bigger picture, I don't think that it would, I don't think it should be an issue if we leave it so that people feel like they're aware of what's going on.
Okay. Well, Councilman Kerwin, it looks like a majority of council is saying that they want to leave it in. It
Except
hasn't
change that
posed,
word.
Change the word.
changed to, up to or, which makes sense. Or, excuse me,
I just
or.
know that just recently, I know that we're going to be looking at a lot of things in ways that we didn't before. Our hands will clearly be tied if we go in to speak on one specific thing. We know that, then we can't generalize about it or do anything else about that. So I suppose I just don't understand why we would limit our ability to look at more than one and still be compliant. But if that's the way the body wants to do it, then that's...
Well, then it would have to be that management would request that we're discussing more than one. We could still do it that way.
Yeah. Do them all.
That still could be done,
Well,
correct?
Whatever the governing body wants to do, we'll do.
Okay,
I think I
all right.
understand Mrs. Kerwin's concern. That would be that, to give a hypothetical example, if we were to, right now we're negotiating with 4 labor unions. And if one pops up before the other ones do, and we're talking about health insurance concessions for this one particular labor union, and Mr. Fleming says, well, John, how you doing on health insurance concessions with the other labor unions? If we only mention MAP, I'm not allowed to answer that question, how we're doing with the other 3 unions.
Right.
If it talks about MAP and other labor unions, that may or may not be discussed because we're not talking about a ratification issue per se, then you could have a holistic discussion on what we're doing with all of our labor unions, all of which becomes a public document for vote by the governing body in a public venue. That's the difference.
With leaving this wording with a change to 4, it still enables us to do it either way, one specific one or more than one, depending on how it's called for. So I think that pretty well covers it.
Just for
Okay.
point of clarification,
Yes.
then, so in other words, if we have a tentative agreement with MAP, and so I'd like to have a concurrence on the conditions therein.
Mhm.
before we go for ratification of the contract, then I should say that we're going to discuss collective bargaining issues with MAP and possibly the other 5 labor unions.
Yes.
Right, yeah,
Well,
Okay.
you could, but then we not have to.
let's really walk all that all the way through though. So we're saying it's an effort to be completely transparent or whatever. What in fact does that do? Does that not create distrust rather than simply going in for collective bargaining as so many governing bodies do? I think that, well, perhaps you respond to that, Mr. Zerler.
Of course. We always want to be mindful of the relationships that we have with all of our employee groups, and especially in these times. And we're negotiating with more than one labor union. If we have a tentative agreement that I'd like to articulate to the city council about the terms thereof, and I mentioned TPOA and we haven't settled yet, I'm sure I'd get a phone call from TPOA saying, John, why are you talking to the council about these items? We're not close to an agreement yet.
Councilman Howard,
Legal question for the attorney. My understanding is that if you're talking in closed session about one union, negotiations with one union, but there's a reference question referring to another union that isn't actually dealing with strategy, that you could still actually talk about it because of its referential relevance. But you couldn't actually strategize.
Ms. Blum?
Certainly, it's correct that you could not strategize, and the purpose of this exception to the Open Meetings Act is to allow for council to convey whether or not what their positions would be to be used by the manager in the collective bargaining negotiations. However, we've been very conservative and err on the side of complete disclosure and not even getting to that point. So it would certainly be my recommendation that if only one bargaining unit is listed, that conversation be limited to that one bargaining unit.
But if there's a point of reference question with respect to any factual information that has or even has happened in the past about another union, for guidance issues, there could even be a union outside the city of Troy that is common knowledge to anybody who does research. It seems to me that would be okay because it is actually it's referential material for the discussion at hand.
There's certainly a number of ways to communicate that information, and it may be very relevant to the strategy of the bargaining unit. So it is possible to convey that information.
So we wouldn't have our hands tied because it's a reference material, whether that be verbal or printed, that we would be able to use for our strategy that we had posted on our minutes as well. Is that correct?
Again, that is correct. We are very conservative in our application, so we want to make sure that we are compliant. But yes, there are a number of ways that if it were for a reference only and not related to strategy, then that information could be conveyed.
Okay.
Your Honor, if I may.
Yes.
So in other words, just to try to take that and translate it into an actual item in a collective bargaining agreement like health insurance. So we have a tentative agreement with, I'm going to say, MAP, and it talks about concessions for health insurance. And Mr. Fleming says, well, John, how are you doing in health insurance concessions for the TPOA and TCOA? I'm allowed to answer.
Again, it's very difficult because this is a fact-specific question, but assuming that you're only using that to provide information about the negotiations for the one that's subject to a closed session, then you could convey that information.
Like health insurance.
If you're seeking direction for these other bargaining units, then that would be impermissible.
Councilman Beltrame?
If the question was asked, is this similar to what you are trying to have the other unions end up with, is that an answerable question?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, any other
I guess
things you want to change?
rather than trying to carefully word all those things.
That's how I'd asked the question, so it wasn't. But
If I may finish. it's just the point that all of that could be discussed if it was simply talking about collective bargaining without any of those, you know, carefully phrased anything. And that's why I'm having trouble. We know that we have a lot of challenges we're going to be facing, and it seems to be that we would be able to have a frank and open look at the holistic picture without trying to parse around it, as was indicated. I could ask a referential point, or if I asked it in this way. Why not just talk about collective bargaining in general, things that we were trying for in general, especially at a time like this? That's why I say, if it's not required, it would just make sense to strike it and have those conversations as a body, give complete direction.
You're striking the second sentence here.
Yes.
Councilman Beltrame?
If it was our practice to tell the city manager, in essence, what we wanted out of those negotiations, I would absolutely agree with Councilwoman Kerwin. But what we in practice actually do is approve the budget, say to John Zerleg or whoever's sitting in that chair, figure out how to make this match, you know where the cuts have to be made, get the best deal you can from the unions and move forward, and then he brings us back a deal. That's how that actually happens in practice, which is why if we did all of those things and discussed 5 unions at a time and gave him directions before he ever went to negotiations, but right now he's in the middle of negotiations, so that's really not a discussion we would have anyway. So that's kind of where I am with this.
Mr. Zerleg?
We've gone both ways in that regard. The most recent way is I asked for an executive session and asked for direction from the governing body before I began negotiations, because unlike the olden days where money was not much of an object, I was pretty confident in whatever we agreed to would be ratified. Now I'm not that confident, so I come here first. And I say, what about this amount for concession on salary? What about this amount for concession on health and so forth? Get concurrence, and then I go out and try to bang a contract as a result of my direction. So again, it's just a matter of, I know these contracts are going to pop up one at a time. If you don't want to talk to me about how I'm coming along on other contracts, then don't.
Councilwoman McGinnis?
We can still list them all if we want to have a discussion about them all. That's the only thing that I'm not clear on. Is that correct? I know it's probably a little bit more inconvenient that you have to be thinking 2 steps ahead, but I think at this point the unions know that we're going to be working through all of those contracts at some point, and they know that we're going to potentially be doing it all at once or individually depending on where we're at. So I guess assuming that we're making the changes to the rules that will hopefully be in place for a while, and we're not going to be doing this again, at some point there will be a time when it's going to be very easy for us to look at one thing and maybe not everything all at once. I don't know, I just think it would, you know, in terms of making people feel like they're comfortable knowing what we're doing, to some extent, we have to list them all, we list them all, I guess.
Mr. Zerleg, you said that poses a problem with...
We'll be happy to do whatever the governing body wants. Just an observation, if I may, and that is that we all want transparency. And if you want to talk about a collective bargaining unit in particular, and maybe in an ancillary fashion talk about the other collective bargaining units, does it really matter if you list them all or not? I mean, if I'm here to talk to you about MAP and list 6 units, is that being disingenuous about the other 5 units and to the public? Because I'm only going to talk about MAP. If no one asks me questions about how I'm doing with the other units, I'm not going to talk about it. So then you have that side of the coin as well.
Right.
I can't know what you want to talk to me about. I know what I want to talk to you about, but if you want to have a similar conversation on how we're coming along with other bargaining units, it's up to you. You can list them all. We may not talk about them all. That's probably just as disingenuous or non-transparent as listing none and talking about all.
I think we're looking at a lot of things tonight as this meeting goes on, where there's been a culture. It's just the way things are done. And for some of us who haven't reviewed the rules, as a body, because it's a fast November meeting.
Right.
It's just, there's the rules, now let's move on. It feels right because that's the way it's been done. And for some of us who are looking at this for the first time and know in fact that many governing bodies do it in different ways, and that the true obligation is to be compliant under the Act, when we've had a situation just within the past month where we found this to be a hindrance, and simple compliance would have had that opportunity to look at a big picture involving all without breaking trust. That's why I bring it up. If the body chooses to continue what they've done, I know that tonight is going through, there's going to be a number of different things that will break the way we've done things because times change. And we are in a challenging time right now.
Well, there's several options. We can make a change tonight if we so desire, or we can leave it as is. If we make a change tonight and find that that's posing a problem for us, you know, in a couple months, we can say, well, we need to go back to including the specific units. That's another option. Because the rules of procedure can be changed at any time. It's just that we're required to have it as an agenda item. Councilman Slater?
What's making this difficult for me is not knowing why this is in here. Because maybe it was meant to say where a closed session is requested of a bargaining unit. And if that was the case, and we left it like that, then Mr. Zerlag could do what has always been done or wants to do.
But he
Because
explained
he
that
would
they-
not, because this says it has to be requested of a bargaining unit.
Right.
So he could do what he chooses to do and not name a bargaining unit, the way this is written right now.
But that had to be an error because bargaining units don't request
Maybe they
council to
did
have a
back in
closed session.
1965.
Yeah, I mean, it may be that old.
No.
No,
That's why it's difficult for me to maybe move forward here, because I don't know why this is in here.
Mayor, I can only offer that I know that this has been changed since 1995 when I've been with the city, because I know that that has been made. And also, I want to clarify that even though, I mean, yes, it may be semantics, and my answer, I can't give you a fact-specific answer right off the cuff. That's because we need to wait until we're there, and that problem still, we need to make sure that there is compliance with the Open Meetings Act. So, but again, this is not required by the Open Meetings Act. So council, if they were to choose to eliminate it, they could do that and still be in compliance with the Open Meetings Act. On the other hand, if you want to keep it in there, certainly there is a rationale for that too, and we will work with the city manager's office and make sure that there is compliance, and so that we are meeting the city's objectives and council's objectives.
Your Honor, if I may, I was here in 95, and I agree with Lori. The intent of this was not to have a collective bargaining unit meet to the city
Right.
council. It was always to have management call a special meeting to discuss strategy or the conditions of the contract to ratify in advance.
Do you want to try
I'm still most comfortable leaving it.
leaving it there? Councilman Howard, do you want to leave it there too? With 4, okay?
I
Council-
agree, leave it
Okay. Councilman Slater?
I'll give it for, yes, for now.
for now.
Councilman McGinnis? Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, let's go to order of business now. The change in order of business is C, certificates of recognition and special presentations. And that was added because that's what we've been doing with practice.
Senator Papa George comes up and wants to talk about something we normally throw in advance of the section.
Well, and it also, we had reports from different departments too, and that was the appropriate time to do that. And it was again, limited to a short time frame too. I think that's important to note. It's not for a lengthy one, presentation. Councilman Kerwin?
Well, I know some practice that had come forward would be really a G. After public comment, there has been a time for clarification. And I wonder if we might want to include that. Currently, now we're doing the clarification. There has been a practice of actually clarifying some things. And would it be appropriate to actually have that as an item before postponed? Public comment, clarification, postponed items.
I think that's a good suggestion. Anybody else? That would move all of the, just the word clarification?
That's what you've been calling it, then?
I know, I just didn't know if we wanted anything more lengthy. Clarification, and then everything else would move up then, H, all the rest would go that way. Okay. You had, Mrs. Bartholomew, you had changed in, which would now be O, about closed session.
Actually, it is an addition to.
Right.
The practice has been, and we have suspended the rule on occasion, to call and take the vote for the closed session prior to going into study session, so that we don't have to go back into the chambers.
Right.
So really, it needs to be in O and in P, because P will be the actual closed session itself. So it's just moving the call forward in front of study session.
Okay. Councilman Beltrame?
My question is, do we need that at all, or can't the resolution for closed session be a regular business item?
Absolutely can be.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So let's put it there and leave the closed session right before the adjournment where it is. But if it's a regular business, then.
So does it have to be designated under regular business, or just do it as regular business, right? Okay, so we don't need that wording at all. Okay, that's fine. Any other changes in that section about the order of business?
Madam Mayor,
Yes, Councilman McGinnis?
I had a question, not about the order at all, but under council comments.
Right.
Some language that describes that says items brought forward by mayor and council will be placed on next regular meeting agenda for action. Items appearing under council comments are not intended for discussion or action at the meeting at which they first appear. I don't know if this is just maybe something that's not necessarily always in practice, but it seems as though sometimes council comments are made and they're just points of discussion for purposes of the meeting. I know Councilwoman Kerwin often brings up things that are happening in the community, things that she wants people to take note of. So I didn't know if this language meant that this was restrictive, and if we were to follow it, we wouldn't be allowed to do that, or if I'm just being too picky.
No, the reason that was added in was that at one time we had some members of council that wanted to bring up an item at the meeting and then have action on it then. And the rest of council said we wanted to have a week, we wanted to get a report from staff if there's additional information necessary. And so if it is not an item of that nature, there should actually be a vote on it at the next meeting. Now, some bodies have items that are read, they have a first reading of an item, and then they actually don't vote on it until the next meeting. And that was added to give people a chance if they needed additional information. Sometimes things were brought up that some members maybe were ready to vote on it that night, but some members weren't. And so we thought it better if people have a chance to think on it.
That makes sense, and then it's still.
For those of you that were here when that was added, is that you seeing it the same way? Okay.
Would it be wise to just have after council comments / general comments and items brought forward by mayor and council would place on it? Would we want to have something, are you wondering if it's prohibiting people from just making general comments?
Well, I know it's not in practice, but I just want to, that gives me more explanation on why that's there. And I do agree with that. I would want to keep that in there if that's the purpose that you have it in there. But I just think in general, I didn't want this language to prohibit us from being able to do what we've been doing. I think that we use it in a very useful way. And I think in terms of what we're hoping we do in terms of taking action from anything the council wants to address, we seem to be using the council referrals more to do that, and that seems appropriate to me. And I guess if we want to add language, we can do that, but as long as it's not prohibitive of us making general comment, then I'm fine with that. I just wanted some explanation.
And most of the times, even on referrals too, it'll be in the agenda, but we don't take action that night. Okay, any others? Okay, cable casting of city council meetings? Anybody have a question on that one? We're seeing a signal, Councilwoman Kerwin?
I do. I'd like to change it after the comma, with the exception of closed sessions and council retreats.
So not closed meeting, council meetings, you want closed sessions.
And council retreats.
Anybody want to disagree or make a comment on those changes? Mayor Pro Tem Fleming?
Some discussion I brought up in a previous meeting. As a cost savings, I don't know what the costs really are, but possibly broadcasting the meetings on CMN rather than WPRY. I don't know if there's a savings there or not, if we could leave ourselves an opening for that, because I don't know what the true costs really are.
Well, we can report on that, I think, Mr. Zerline?
To expedite this issue, we could just indicate that all city council meetings will be broadcast. And then, when we do our report, whichever is the most cost efficient and city council agrees, that's what we can plug in.
Okay, so we could take out the specific reference to, on WTRY?
I like that.
Just broadcast, okay.
Can I get a clarification?
Yes, Ms. Bartholomew?
On the one striking of meetings and inserting sessions, of city council, does that remain, or is it also struck?
Yes.
Struck closed sessions and council retreats.
Oh,
It
okay.
says all city council meetings will be broadcast, so you've already got it there.
Closed session and council.
Right.
Mayor?
Yes, Councilman Howard?
Let's see, first, with respect to council retreats, why wouldn't we want to broadcast those?
Why wouldn't we want to broadcast those, you said?
That's
Is that
right.
your question? Okay. Anyone want to respond with that? Councilwoman McGinnis?
Well, I know that we've talked about having a council retreat, so this is something that I think we're planning in the future. And in terms of historically, I guess I can't speak for anything that's been accomplished with council retreats in the past, but I was under the assumption that it wouldn't be anything to do with city business or official business. It would be more about a team building experience, and I just don't know how effective that would be if we're trying to be more open with each other and build those kinds of relationships. It doesn't really seem like something that would want to be, you want broadcast, I don't know, but I could be way off base.
I know in practice there are many public bodies that have, they don't have their retreats broadcast because but they still comply with the law with everything that they're supposed to do as far as with the retreat. Mrs. Bloom, do you want to speak to that? Do you know about other groups and how they, whether they televise and don't televise?
Yes, certainly, Mayor, it's council, there, you do have to post it,
Right.
And it is preferred to have it within the city. There are certain requirements, but it's really, council's discretion on this. If it truly is team building and no business of the city is conducted, which has occurred in several other communities,
Right.
generally most people feel not as inhibited. in participation if it's not broadcast. So that's the reason why it's not broadcast in other communities that have done this. But again, you have to choose what council's preference is in doing that and what the makeup of any potential retreat would be.
But these are still public meetings, is that correct?
Absolutely. And there would be posting, and it would be preferably within the city of Troy, and public, it would be open to the public unless it's specifically authorized to be closed.
And just for clarification purposes, there's nothing that would prevent a member of the general public from broadcasting this, from having a Twitter feed, from broadcasting it on YouTube or any other mechanism, is that correct?
The open meetings does allow for videotaping or recording by any member of the public. That's included in the attendance that's allowed by the public.
And so I would say, why not broadcast it? The other thing is, with respect to WTRY, I would see that we're going to have that as a station or tell a cable company they can put something else on there. So if they're going to have it, I don't think it's the transmission on the station that is the cost issue. It's who's actually doing the broadcasting. I would be interested in looking at contracting with CMN to do that, but I'd still want it on WTRY. Okay. If we're going to have the station, we should use it.
Do you think it's necessary to have WTRY in the, listed here?
I do, yeah.
Further discussion? Well, we need to iron out, we've got differing opinion on whether to keep the wording of on WTRY in there or not in there. You were the one that brought it up, Mayor Pro Tem Coleman. What do you feel?
Yes, and I was just thinking, I don't know what the cost are, or how else we would broadcast it, Councilman Howard. I don't know. The key to me is that it's broadcast and it's available to the general public. And if WTRY is the only mechanism to do that, fine, but I thought we'd give ourselves an option. But certainly not wanting to do anything that would restrict the audience to it. And I just didn't know through what we were considering with CMN if there might be a better way, a more cost-effective way, or whatever. Out of my league, quite honestly.
Well,
I don't want to do anything that would restrict the audience.
Right. The only restriction to the audience is the fact that not all cable companies or people that do it, because, for example, if you have AT&T Ubers, you can't get the local thing here. You can get other cities' local things, but you can't get Troy because they want us to pay a fee, even though when they originally did the law, it was supposed to be covered under there. So that's something we're trying to iron out with AT&T. So there is some restriction in that way. But as far as our restricting people from it, no, we're not. But they'd have to, have access to those channels. If they don't have access to those channels, then they can't get it. But they can get a DVD at the, view it at the library. Councilman Beltramini?
For those people who use this document for reference, it's probably a good idea to use WTRY, leave it in there until we have an alternative.
Okay.
But I do have to side with the ladies on the other side of the table that, and I have found it inhibiting and restrictive, believe it or not, to have retreats televised. I think that councils can have a much better relationship, team building exercise without worrying about 80,000 people watching this over and over again in chapters.
Well, and Councilman Howard makes a good point, is that any of the members of the public that wanted to attend or can attend, because it is an open public meeting, so it's not as if somebody, can't come, they want to come. Okay, any more discussion on that one? Okay, minutes?
So we're going to keep WTRY.
Yes.
Until,
Right.
sorry.
Okay, any changes on the minutes?
Mayor,
Yes, Councilwoman McGinnis?
I think you have that same language that we just dealt with the closed session and the bargaining units. If you're changing it to 4 previous one rather than of, we would need to change it here as well, I think.
Good catch. Okay, proclamations, reconsideration of questions. Recession of questions. Withdrawal of motions prior to voting. Tell me if I'm going too fast. Public hearings. Any changes? Consent agenda. Oh, Councilman Kerwin?
It's just kind of a grammar thing. It's maybe the fourth sentence down where it starts recommended. I would just.
Under which item?
This is consent agenda, fourth sentence. It says recommended action by removing an item from the consent agenda and have it considered. I would suggest having it considered. It's just nothing but.
Wait a minute. Having, okay. Any others? Okay, appointments to board, commission, and committees. Of course, that's going to be part of our discussion later on in the item, so there might be some changes we want to make in here. Councilman Kerwin?
This is again another small thing. This is item 15, appointments. It's in the paragraph that begins, the mayor or any other. If you go down to the third sentence that begins such name, comma, for nomination, not into nomination.
What? Where is that?
It's in.
Second paragraph?
It's appointments. It's in, under the mayor.
Okay,
Submit such name for nomination, not into. Just.
okay, thank you. Any others? We changed this, we used to nominate and vote on them that same night, and we changed it to be the next meeting so that people that brought a name forward, if we didn't have all the background on that person, that gave people a chance to think about it to the next meeting. Okay? And then the method of voting on nominees, the same. Anybody want any changes there on page 5? Okay, 15, yes, Councilor Slater?
Requested the vote
The blue.
in the blue.
That's mine.
You're going to talk about that one?
No,
Oh, I got these little papers here, I got to go on the right one. Okay, Councilwoman Delphine?
simply brings it into practice, and the clerk's office gave me credit for it, but actually added the retiree health care benefits. I had that on my list later to talk about. None of these three boards is required to have a council member by statute, and in fact, when we approved the LDFA, the original agreement came to us with a requirement that said no members of the board shall be elected officials. And this council, to approve that LDFA, actually changed that section to put a city council person with 2 alternates on that board. So because of that, I feel that this section needs to reflect that decision, as long as we're going to have the LDFA and hold council people on that board. And we've also expanded the retiree health system board to include the healthcare trust.
Right.
So now that's 2 boards. So
So
that's 3.
the blue wording which was added does reflect actually what we're doing. Anybody have any problem with that? Adding that in? Okay. All right, appointment to, the representation to SEMCOG and SACRA. Okay, members of the public and visitors, anybody want changes there? I had, at the request of council, the first couple months or maybe 3 months we were doing it. I was saying it every meeting. Now I haven't been saying it because it's in print in several places. Is council satisfied with that? Okay, I didn't feel I needed to, council would say it unless there was we started having a problem with people not understanding about it. Okay,
Yeah.
Councilman Kerwin?
It does occur to me, though, that you are mentioning out loud, to mute cell phones or whatever you talk about
Yes.
in terms of that. And I don't know whether that might be one of the bullets, just thinking right now, whether you wanted to include that.
Oh, in writing in the agenda, so I don't have to say it out loud?
That's just a thought.
I had been saying it out loud, and I stopped saying that too, but if you
Well, when
feel
you
that-
stopped saying it, then it turned out.
Yeah,
think
if you
she's
feel
right.
that I need to do it,
I think her point's just to note it in here.
Right.
Don't
Yeah.
say it.
note it.
I was just gonna say, I think we're always gonna have to say, because, you go to church and people are still leaving their ringers on, people forget. And I think that's half the issue, is that,
They announced.
most people know they're not supposed to have their
Right.
cell phone on. But when I noticed when you mentioned it, and then everybody's looking down in their pockets and,
Just to
be
see if they're
sure.
awake.
Just to be sure, yeah. I think it's just a good practice.
Yeah. I know at our church, they announce it every single time, and some places they announce it, some places they don't, but it's probably a good idea. It's not, I don't think people intentionally are.
No.
Most people are pretty cognizant of that, so. Okay, postpone, any changes? Rules of order, any changes? Miscellaneous expenses, any changes?
Oh,
Spent-
actually.
Yes, Councilman Howard?
It just occurred to me, is this the latest copy of the Robert's Rules of Order, is it the 10th
10th?
edition?
It currently is, but it is currently being revised and should be coming shortly. So
Okay.
Right now it is,
All right.
but not for long.
Well, that's a very good point. Should it say the current edition rather than newly revised 10th edition, gold standard, or whatever you wanted? Would that make more sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Current edition?
Or latest.
Okay.
Or whatever you choose to put in
Okay, good, good.
there. Or just newly revised
Yeah,
edition.
okay. Expenses out of town, travel for city business, any changes? Absences at council meetings, that's 21.
One thing
Councilman Kerwin?
is just, again, this is just grammar, and it's in the first line, it says, and desiring, it just says, and desire. Council members who are unable to attend a council meeting and desire an excused absence shall notify the city manager. So, and then, I suppose it's a good time to talk about absences in general, because there's been disagreements, the charter says this, the charter says that, so maybe we should do a charter search now. Take a look at that. I think chapter 4 in chapter 4 of the charter, page 11, 4.6, compulsory attendance and conduct of meetings. I don't think that there have been 2 or more members of the council requesting or compelling the attendance of the other members. And this has been a concern, I think, that someone has shared. But I don't think anyone's trying to, I don't remember that happening. I don't mean a resolution passed. I don't remember any of that. Any 2 or more members of the council may, by vote, either request or compel the attendance of its members. I think basically we're posting meetings and expecting people to come.
This is if we call for a special meeting, and I can call it under just me, or it takes 2 council members to.
I bring it up, Mayor, because this is the language
Right.
that says, I'm bringing that up,
Okay.
because that's not happening. If this is the language that says, unless excused by the council, And this seems to be the language that gets us into the bind rather than just simply,
Oh, I see, about excusing rather than
Yes.
just saying you're here or you're not here, okay.
and then the other thing then flips over. One thing, ladies, since you're here, on page 11, there's another grammatical error at the bottom. It should be, right here, 4.7, a written or printed journal of the proceedings of each meeting shall be kept in the English. That's just minor, that's just as we went through. Did you find it? Shall be keep.
To be kept, not keep.
But flipping over to page 12, shall be keep.
Just, well, Your Honor, just to clarify, we need to look at the language of the charter that was passed, and there have been occasions where they are not grammatically correct. So if it's in there as passed by the voters as keep, then we'll need to keep that.
Then
If it's a typographical error, certainly that can be modified.
Then my only suggestion, and this is just minor and aside, is simply asterisk it and make note that that's the language as charter was passed, so that we're not looking, why we're not literate. But
Especially because it talks about the English language.
on 12, page 12, under C, then, we have this, no member of the council shall. Oh, wait, there's one more absence piece. Is it, where, it's on, pardon me,
Oh,
chapter
yeah.
6:18.
Chapter 6, 18, okay. 18, and go to 6:14.
Chapter 6, 6.2,
Oh, page 18.
page 18.
She's talking about this, yeah. Okay.
And that's kind of like a D thing, if the officer shall absent himself continuously from the city for more than 30 consecutive days in any 1 year without the permission of the council, and that hasn't happened. So I know that it's been the suggestion of staff that we continue to move to excuse absences, but when I review the charter, I don't know that we're in not any of those situations where it simply couldn't be pointed out, as we have laid on the table, that it has been communicated in writing that the council member's out of the county or ill or whatever it is.
Councilman Beltrame?
The one case where it does require an excusal is in 6.2E, where it says if you've missed 5 consecutive meetings or of the council or 25% of such meetings in any fiscal year of the city, unless such absences shall be excused by the council, and the reason therefore entered in the proceedings of the council at the time of each absence. Which, and I know from time to time, when it has seemed like a council member has missed a seemingly excessive amount of meetings, some members of council have said, okay, I'm done excusing for a while. And that happens, but this is why we excuse.
Yep. Shall be entered into the proceedings of the council at the time of each absence is not, what I'm wondering, if there isn't a way simply to enter that piece of paper that we've received written correspondence.
It says such absences shall be excused by the council. That
And.
requires an action.
And the reason entered.
What you're saying, Councilwoman Kerwin, is there seems to be a conflict in different parts of the charter? Or you think the charter's saying the same thing, just worded differently in
Well,
different places?
I want to be in compliance with it. I just
Right.
think that there are different ways. To bring up Councilmember Beltrami's, just in response to that, we have in fact had a resolution to excuse from the past year. That was excused through resolution, not time after time after time. That was just kind of like a swept, we'll excuse for past absences.
Really? When did we do that? I
thought-
don't remember that.
I thought Councilmember Eisenbacher.
There was, yes,
There was.
Mrs. Bartholomew?
Sure, and I believe at the time, and the attorney, she's here, so she can state, but it was explained that that would not satisfy the requirements of the charter. So there was a motion made by Councilman Eisenbecker, and this body did approve it, but that, I think cautionary words were also given at the time.
So it doesn't satisfy.
Mrs. Blum?
Well, it does state that it does have to be, that the reason has to be entered into the proceedings of that particular meeting, and I know that that issue has come up on a number of occasions, and I know that this issue has been brought up. Now, certainly, council does not have to excuse a member if they're not satisfied that the excuse that's provided is sufficient. I mean, you have that discretion to decide whether or not it's a reason that you would excuse an individual member.
And some groups that don't, some other bodies that don't excuse their members, they just say they're absent, they put it on the record as being absent, don't have it in their charter or in written information that for their formation of the body that they have to have it. The difference is that we have it in our charter, correct?
We allow for you to excuse the members in our charter, and it prohibits you from doing it at a later date.
Right.
It needs to be done at the time if you so choose to do that.
Okay.
And again, that's not dealing with 4.6, it's just when there is a compulsory, your 2 or more members
Right.
require a person to be there. That's the only time that 4.6 would be applicable.
Okay.
Mayor,
Councilman Kerwin?
that was McGinnis.
Oh, Councilman McGinnis?
When I was looking at this, and I know we've had some conversations about it so far this year, so I think that the issue that I need some clarification on is that it appears to be talking about 2 different things. Under section 4.6, we've got a situation where if 2 or more members of the council are requesting or compelling the attendance of its members, and then for whatever reason the members don't show, the excuse that they would have for not showing up when compelled or requested to would be either confining illness or absence from Oakland County, right? Not having a history of where those two excuses came from. But I think the difference here is that in section 6.2, there isn't really anything that's stated that would give us a basis for an excused or an unexcused. I mean, really, it seems like they're 2 totally separate things. And if that's the language that we're stuck with, that's fine, but I think some differentiation has to be made between the fact that just being out of county or having a confining illness doesn't give you carte blanche reason to have an excuse, or council would have to consider that an excused absence. I mean, I'm not sure making that clarification puts us in a better position or a worse position, but I think it seems like thus far, by submitting either proof of illness or just an absence from Oakland County, council members were feeling as though that should satisfy the excuse requirement, where it doesn't seem like there are really any basis for when we should or should not excuse an absence based on what's here in 6.2. They seem like they're 2 different things to me. So I don't know, and since we're not really ever using this situation where 2 people are demanding that someone shows up to a meeting, then those excuses.
That's when 2 council members would like to have a meeting on a particular subject, and they, Mrs. Bartholomew, sign a form requesting there be a meeting. Isn't that what we're speaking of in 4.6?
Mayor, Councilwoman
Yes.
McGinnis is correct in that it is when there is a formal resolution of 2 or more council members
Right.
that tells an absent member, you need to be present at a meeting of council. That, to best of my recollection, has never occurred while I've been city attorney, at least.
Where is the section about the calling of the special meeting? Oh, that's in
That's
4.2.
4.2.
4.2, okay. I see what you're saying. Okay.
But these 2 reasons, Mayor, just to continue
Right.
on, absence from the county and illness could very well be reasons why you would excuse them under 6.2E. But there may be more reasons why you would feel that a person should be entitled to an excuse as well. Or you may feel that it's not a legitimate excuse, but you do have the discretion.
I think the concern, though, is that this 4-6 seems to be what's been practiced now, out of the county, out of the county, out of the county. So it's only in reading this and coming to this when in fact that situation hasn't happened. So we need to get off of this whole compulsory attendance thing. We're expecting people to attend. And for the most part, people do attend. But that out of the county or something like that doesn't fit here with the general page 18, 6.2.
Also, if somebody's not in the county,
Councilman Howard,
Yeah, I'm
yes,
sorry.
no, it's all right.
if somebody's out of the county, it's kind of hard for them to be here.
Well, perhaps Councilmember Beltramini will give an example.
Well, I regularly, thank you, Mayor. I regularly say somebody can be at the Kroger store at the corner of DeQuinder and Long Lake and be out of the county. And actually, that's as close to City Hall as my house. So I do have, this is a little loose, but on the other hand, you know, did I want to announce to the world that I was literally out of the country to give my excuse?
Yeah.
So I privately told all of you that, so that when it came through as out of the county, you would know that. So there are shades of this that are, I think, appropriate. But again, I go back to, we don't expect any of us to miss 5 consecutive meetings or 25% of the meetings. But if the practice is to absolutely not excuse, to just make that expectation, then when someone does have a confining illness, and it's the 6th meeting because, oh gee gosh, we didn't think that they would be gone that long, all of a sudden we got to think about removing them from office. So it is, I think, a valuable practice of this body to, whenever possible, excuse an absent member with a valid written excuse.
I don't know when 4.6 was put in the charter way back when, but I assume that that section was put in because there must have been something that said members that were on council way back then, if they wanted to have a special meeting, they were going to compel the other members to be there. There must be some reason why that was put in there back in
You can call it I won't come.
50s, you know. And so it seems a little foreign to us now, but maybe then it made sense. Councilman Slater?
I wasn't on council, but I do recall a request like that. And I don't think I need to get into the details, but I do remember that happening before.
Right. There had been.
And I think it was, you compel so that you have a quorum.
Right.
So that you can conduct business at that special meeting. It was an emergency meeting.
Right.
So they compelled everybody
Right.
to be there, so they had a quorum so that they could make a decision.
Right.
So it makes sense to me.
Yeah, I remember 4 instances where special meetings were
Yes.
called, and I had called one because I had to call one time the, I don't know if it was the attorney or the manager's office. There was something that came up that we had to do a meeting, you know, and so I had to call it. And then there were some that were called by 2 members of council. So, but it's just when you read the wording here, it just seems like, you know, archaic language for some reason. Councilwoman McGinnis?
Well, the other thing too, I think, if now that we're able to see the difference between the purposes for which you use these excuses that are listed in section 4.6, it actually makes a lot more sense, because if you only have 24-hour notice requirement to call a special meeting, and two members of the council want certain people to be there so that they can get some business done, but if it's 24 hours and I'm out of town, I'm not going to be there, and a valid excuse, I think, in that situation would be, I'm not in the county, I'm wherever, and it's 24 hours notice. I think that the difference you see between 4.6 and why perhaps that rule wouldn't always apply, or shouldn't always be just the bottom base level for why we would excuse an absence. I think because you're seeing the difference between the potential for calling a meeting and having 24 hours notice, and the potential for having meetings at 7:30 every other Monday for an entire year. That's my difference. And I'm not of the mind, really, that we should not necessarily excuse any absences, but I did want to get some clarification that absence from Oakland County without any other notice is maybe not, it's not what's asked for you to do here. I think we need to just differentiate that that's not the requirement.
Mayor?
Councilman Howard?
Well, I don't disagree. I guess my point is that it's really the burden is really on the maker and the seconder of the motion. And so when that motion is put on the table, is made, then it should probably be as clear as the majority of council wants, or amended there. But I think Councilwoman Beltramini brings up a good point. It's a question I've always thought of as well. But I will bring out that section 4.6 could easily be abused if there's no mechanism for excusing individual members of council. And additionally, the fact that there are references in a charter to excusing members of council kind of begs the question of what is your policy of doing it. So that is why I think it's important to actually have it in here. Obviously, council doesn't have to excuse people, but there needs to be some mechanism if that is the desire of council.
Do you think there need to be any changes in the wording in our rules of procedure under 21 after all this discussion, or do you think it's satisfactory other than changing the word desiring to desire? Councilman Kerwin?
I do. When it says indicate the reason for the absence, I would include the language right here in the charter which says entered into the proceedings of the council. So that, in fact, you would have that document say it indicates that Councilmember Beltramini is unable to attend tonight's meeting because she's conducting a seminar. And I think we can give authentic reasons for why we're not there now, not out of the country, I understand that. But now it's out of the county, we know where that came from, and that has nothing to do with where we really are. So we can really say where we are, and that's fine. I think the authentic piece and that paper would be added. My suggestion would be at the end where you add your proclamation pieces, all of those different correspondence, that would then be incorporated in the minutes as part of the correspondence. But that's what I think should happen, because then it's the person's word from the written paper on why that person is not in attendance at that meeting.
Anybody have a problem with that?
That's the language.
Okay. Does that make sense?
Entered in the proceedings of the council at the time.
What did you add? Excuse me? Under A, indicate the reason for the absence.
And that's entered, well, it's just language from the charter, entered in the proceedings of the council at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, Councilman Beltramini, that's right.
If I may, the roll call in our order of business says, excuse absent council members pursuant to rule number 21. The clarification may be there to add the reason for the excuse, however the clerk would write that. But that may be the place to put it so that as part of the motion, the language from the written document is incorporated, and then the clerk can figure out where that document needs to be attached in the minutes. But that's probably a better place for it, because then it shows up right on the agenda.
That's fine.
And that way it won't get forgotten, because it's right there every time. Okay. All right. Changes in suspended rules? Changes in council discussion? We pretty much have been doing that. Sometimes I will call on another council member before everybody's had a turn. I'd like to rotate the turns and make sure everybody gets a turn, but that was why I asked the meeting for people to say out loud, Mayor, rather than giving me, now here I can see everybody and give them the signal, but at the council table, trying to look at the left and the right and get everybody in the right order is a little difficult, because I am trying to make sure that everybody has a chance. And this really does speak to the fact that anybody who desires to speak should have a turn before I call on another council member for a second turn. So I think pretty much in practice we've been doing it. I'm not trying to make a big deal out of it. I'm just explaining at this time why I asked people to say verbally, you know, so that I can hear you. Except sometimes I can't. Or I get your voices mixed up. Okay, and I understand that the council audio system is being that with a good bid so that we will be able to, all of us hear better, and the audience too, in the council chamber, which will make it a lot easier on everybody. Okay, agenda items submitted by council members. Got any questions about that? Okay, video and audio presentations.
Here.
Councilman Howard?
No questions or debate about the intent of it, but I do think we should add a day for clarification purposes if it's 12 noon on Friday or 12 noon on Monday. I think it implies that it's 12 noon on the day of the meeting, but I would just like to add that language for clarification.
What should it be?
12 noon on the day of the meeting. Yeah.
Okay. 26, continued agenda items not considered before 12 a.m. Violations. Wire communications between council members during and on this one, number 28, Councilwoman Beltramini has on the yellow sheet, wire communications between struck out, and it says by and to council members during any meeting of the council. You want to speak to that, Council?
Well,
Good suggestion.
As I said in my email, this section was added so that we wouldn't violate the Open Meetings Act, and to not have each of us separately accessing the internet or each other or some removed kitchen cabinet is what I said in my email. And therefore, by and to kind of covers all of that.
Right.
In my corrections, I had just written of, wire communications of council members during the meeting.
I just think by and to says you won't get anything from us and you can't send anything to us, so don't even try, you're not gonna be there.
Any other changes?
Here.
Councilman Howard?
Just to reiterate my preference for the previous mechanism of public comment and my objection to the current one. That's one point. And then the second point is my continued objection to travel expenses or other expenses other than our regular salary for members of the city council. So I would actually object to the changes that were made to sections, to the public comment section within the last year, and I would object to the existence of section 20.
The expenses, I believe is referred to in the charter. Am I correct, Mrs. Long? That's in there, and I don't think anybody's actually been abusing that at all, and many of us don't turn anything in, and haven't for years, but I think it's because of the charter reference. Am I correct, Mrs. Long? I think it is in there.
Yeah, fair enough. I guess we need a mechanism.
A mechanism, if it,
Right. I said that's a fair comment. So
okay.
I guess my only remaining objection would be the changes that we made to the public comment section.
Okay.
And Mayor, it is in
Yes.
section 3.6, it does provide for reasonable and necessary expenses incurred in service on behalf of the city and authorized in advance
Right.
by council. Itemized or paid by the council, so that's
Right.
section 3.6.
Okay. All right. Okay. Councilman Howard, on your objection to the public comment section, what were the objections? I know you.
Twofold, if I may. One is that the previous, I don't believe that there was any basis for concern, or cause for concern, the way we were doing it prior to the changes that were enacted. And I think it was November, December of last year. I don't believe that members of the public was dominating the meeting. I do believe that council meetings, when they drag on because of things that council does, whether that be, you know, to the benefit of the community or otherwise. So I believe that what we did is made it more cumbersome for the members of the public to address council verbally during a council meeting. That's my opinion. The other thing is that since we're wrapping all of the public comment into this one public comment section, which is essentially at the beginning of the meeting, save for the public hearing section, if public comment on an item that is not on the agenda requires a staff response, and then that bogs down the rest of the meeting on something that wasn't even on the agenda to begin with. And so I think what it does is it holds up other items, and there may be people that have specifically come to see if their bid is awarded, or just to see how certain action is drawn to a close by the city council. And so I do, for those two reasons, not like the way the public comment is currently structured, but I don't, think that it's worth arguing, because I think we just did it within the last year. I just wanted to state my objections.
I think that the change was good in the fact that it gave the public an opportunity to talk at the beginning of the meeting, and that if they had other things they wanted to do, that they could do that. The only time, of course, the time limit comes in, and changing the time limit, is if we have a whole bunch of people that want to come on items, and that has occurred over a period of years when we've had big groups come to want to speak, and I think that's appropriate, because, you know, we usually would spend like 2 hours, you know, or an hour and a half listening to things, and which is fine, but, you know, instead of keeping it to the 5-minute, we change it to the 3 if we have more than 15 people sign up. Anybody else want to comment about any sections that we talked about that you want to make any comments on? Are you satisfied with the changes that we've made? Okay, all right. Uh-oh, we're way past.
There's a timekeeper.
Who made this time limit thing?
Oh, my staff did. All mistakes
Well,
are
it's
mine.
time for them to have mystical thinking.
Okay,
Well, these
now my
times-
next question is, does council wish to take a break since it's 9 o'clock? And then come back to boards and committees? Okay, all right, so we'll take, what, 5 or 10 minutes? 5, okay, 5 minutes, we're in recess for 5 minutes. try to go from 9 to 10, get as much done as we can get done, okay?
Is that
Do it
okay?
another
All right.
time, then we'll just
Yeah,
add it on to another
Would you
meeting.
mind? Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Is that why that's like this?
We really had
No,
our.
or the closed session.
No, I didn't have anything to do with this.
Yeah.
It's because we ran long on the other one, but that's a good point.
This was optimistic. We're making progress. It's okay.
Right.
Until the next.
And if council members felt they really needed to keep going, they
We
could
would.
keep going, but, you know,
Right.
you could go home.
I don't want
And Mayor, just
Okay, yes.
to clarify, Ms. Bartholomew is over here, and just to clarify, this will come back to you as an action item on
Right.
the next agenda.
Yes.
So,
to. Thank you.
just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right, yes, because we don't take action at official meetings anyway, so. Okay, very good. All right, we're on to boards and committees, and I note of two things that are in here. Where is it? Let's get to it. There's a chart at the, not the very beginning one, the chart that is after the first tab, which talks about boards and committees that are by state statute, charter, ordinance, or resolution. I found that very helpful. It's after the
Oh, way
first
back here. Okay,
tab.
gotcha.
Yeah, it's a pay board one.
Yep.
That was helpful to me to look at. The other thing that I found very helpful was the item that, of staff time spent on supporting boards and committees. That was something that I had asked for back when I knew we were gonna be talking about this. Because the reason this all came up to discuss boards and committees was with less staff and less time, we need to look at boards and committees to determine, do we need to keep all these in place, do we need to adjust them, do we need to eliminate some? And so that's why this discussion's occurring, okay? So, I am going to propose that the ones that are by state statute, I'm sort of required to do, so that we're not eliminating any of those by state statute unless that we get an opinion by Mrs. Bloom that we can do that. Councilman Beltrame, do you have a question?
Yeah, the Board of Canvassers is enabled through state statute, and I understand that we turned that over to the county, haven't we? That's right.
Right.
And
So
then,
why do we need one?
We don't have.
We don't have it now.
No, but my point is, we still have these people on the list, and the mayor just said if it's by statute, we're gonna keep them. I think that's one we don't have to keep.
I was gonna bring that up in my next sentence, that we did get the information on that. Are there any others that have been put under a different entity?
Not that I'm aware of, and I know that there's also legislation that's currently active that is going to be taking the Board of Canvassers and putting them under county control, taking that responsibility away from local government because of the school election. So that is going to happen most likely legislatively as well.
Okay. Okay, the other thing is, if it is required by charter, and it's a committee that we feel that we really don't need to have for some reason, we have to have a charter amendment before the committee is dissolved. Mrs. Bloom?
Yes, Mayor, if it is, and there are only a couple of them that are provided for by our charter, but yes, you would need to submit it to the voters, and the voters would need to approve it prior to you dissolving that committee.
Okay. The ones that I see here on this chart are Board of Review, charter, and state statute, Election Commission, charter, and
Planning Commission.
Planning Commission. I don't really see us doing away with any of those three. Does anybody? Okay. So that leaves us down to other, by ordinance or resolution. So do we want to go alphabetical or yes, Councilman McGinnis?
I guess I was wondering if someone could give additional information about economic development, where it indicates with 3 asterisks that the board doesn't meet, so no staff time is expended.
Yes.
Yeah, Ms. Boone?
Mayor, this is one where I would certainly recommend that you keep this in existence because there are continuing obligations. It does need to remain in existence, even though it has been fairly inactive. You still need to have that body out there because there are pending obligations.
Okay, and that one is S&R. Oh, okay. Are there any, do you want to go through alphabetically for those that are by ordinance or resolution? Okay, right. Advisory Committee for Persons with Disabilities is by resolution. And, you know, the other thing is that we discussed at one point about that we may want to roll some of these committees together, not have that, the same number of people, double the amount, in other words, if we put 2 committees together, but have a committee that is composed of, and for example, there are people on the Advisory Committee with Persons with Disabilities who are also on, aren't they on Park, don't they send a member to the Parks Board, Parks and Rec Board?
Senior students.
Okay. So that in some instances, we have individuals that are really serving a dual purpose by being on double boards. Okay. Does someone want to comment about this committee? Do we need to keep this committee? Yes, Mrs. Bloom?
Mayor, this is not actually to the committees themselves, but perhaps one thing that, and maybe Ms. Bartholomew can clarify this a little bit more, but the expiration dates are listed in here by month, and I just wanted to make sure that that was clear because it's sort of thrown in there, but the month that they expire and is listed. So the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 would correspond with the month that their appointment dates are.
Right.
The numbers across top of the chart.
Yes, the numbers across the top is the month.
So before you got it.
Right, okay.
Mayor,
Yes, Councilman Howard,
before we proceed, would be curious to know if the city manager has any comments about perhaps reducing staff time and commitment to some of the non-statute, non-charter, non-ordinance boards by way of perhaps not having as many staff liaison, not having a staff liaison meet at every meeting perhaps, or perhaps requesting that those committees meet fewer times, or perhaps even that they do their own minutes, which, you know, on some of the committees that in the past, the committee has done their own minutes. They've actually had a secretary, so perhaps there are things of that sort that we could use to assist us in our discussion.
I can
Mr.
certainly,
Zerbe? Oh,
I
yeah.
can certainly look into that. I not do any research in terms of determining if staff members can reduce their time spent on each committee. My posture was that I wanted staff to just indicate how much time they historically spend on each committee. And the position that we have as management is that whether a board or committee is sanctioned or developed by resolution or ordinance, whatever the governing body wants, we'll be happy to staff it. And if the council decides to maintain any or all committees that are authorized by statute, or I'm sorry, authorized by resolution or ordinance, I can certainly go back to staff and ask them what they can do to reduce staff hours. If you're on the cusp, if you will, of deciding whether or not you want to keep a committee, I can in advance go to staff to see what they can do to reduce hours to that particular committee.
I would actually be curious to see what that provides. And, you know, I do know that there are some committees that perhaps should actually even have a time limit if there is going to be a staff liaison there, because, you know, there are resources, and perhaps it would be helpful to the committee to know to what extent they're allowed to draw upon those resources, and that does include staff time, I would say.
Okay, Councilman Kerwin? Councilman Slater?
Just to piggyback, I was thinking the exact same thing when I was going through and reading these boards and committees, and I see they're all over the board. Some meet at 7:30 at night, some meet during the day, some meet in the morning, some meet once a month, some twice a month, some take the summer off. And when I look at some of these numbers here of the staff hours that are dedicated, I was shocked to see how many hours our staff attends these, and I think I agree, and I support that. We need to look at this and try and whittle this down somehow.
Mr. Zerline?
Thanks. In conjunction with that, I could also have the staff members talk to the board about their mission, if you will. As an example, the Advisory Committee for Persons with Disabilities, we were the first committee in the state of Michigan to have one like that. And that was during the point in time where we did close to $200 million of capital programming for our municipal buildings. And as opposed to having all able-bodied people look at our site plans and specifications, we wanted to have people with disabilities look at our plans to see what modifications they would recommend for our structures. And they came up, that committee came up with some very good recommendations. You know, one was the canopy extension on both sides of this building. Another one was to have a bus that had a lift on there. And perhaps we could have the representative as an example for that committee. Talk with them about their initial focus, which was essentially site plan review and looking at major capital projects to see if they could be more friendly for people with disabilities. I can do that as well.
Councilman Kerwin, go ahead.
Well, Councilmember Beltramini has actually mentioned before that it would be a perfect fit for someone to serve on planning commission or be available for planning commission review and have that perspective. And that would be a great blending of I don't want to speak for you, but I know that you have said that before.
Councilman Beltramini?
The other thing is, I have said that I think that we do have some populations that have special needs that if they, and yet the mayor makes the appointments to the planning commission. However, as I look at this list, I believe that if we think about it, some of those special interests could be incorporated into a committee for a well-rounded community and take the interests of 3 or 4 different committees and put them in one with a liaison. So that then when the planning commission, Parks and Rec, whomever, had a new structure, a new development, they had a one-stop shop to bring it to for seniors and diversity and people with disabilities and physical challenges.
I think that's a wise suggestion, because if we were to keep all of these committees and then add on committees, we're actually adding on to the workload of the citizens and of the staff. So we need to be thinking in terms of what committees can we pare down and then use some people perhaps that have served on those committees, or people that have served on with the Citizens Academy, and how they would best be used in a different function. I see Mrs. Bloom signaling.
Yes, Mayor, thank you. Just another consideration that I want council to keep in mind is that the more boards and committees that we have, the more exposure we have to compliance with the Open Meetings Act.
Right.
And there are some very explicit requirements for minutes and things, and I think one of the reasons why staff became so involved in the minute taking was because we had boards and committees that were not compliant with the Open Meetings Act. So again, you should just bear that in mind when you're having these discussions, that we also, for every board and committee, it will qualify as a public entity and you'll have to comply with the Open Meetings Act.
Okay. Perhaps starting going alphabetically is being difficult for people. If people want to mention some other ones in between, they can. Mayor Pro Tem Fleming?
Just keeping with this committee, advisory committee for persons with disabilities, looking at the meeting minutes from November the 6th and appointment of members and alternate members, that committee was broken down with 9 people, 3 to be specific with persons with disabilities, 3 for people with transportation, residents in need of transportation, and then 3 from the general population. So we're thinking about combining committees. We need to look at what people's roles were on the committees and make sure we don't leave out some aspect of it. Because if we're thinking about planning, we might leave out transportation. So I'm all for reducing the committees and combining them. Let's just make sure we don't leave some facet out that's important.
Councilwoman Caroline?
I think, just as a preface before we launch into each committee, I thought it was very interesting to read the history of the committees and some of the charges and how long they've been here, and to think about that time, which is so different from now, when agendas were mailed and people had meetings because that was their only source of information, and the input to council went through the same process. And now we are so digital, you know, things come through email, and many of us I know have conferences on by computer or doing any of those things. We have cell phones, we have immediate contact. So the reasons and the form of the original committees have not evolved over time. And I think that part of this discussion is to see how we can command all of those wonderful opportunities for people to connect and participate. Madam Mayor, you mentioned the Citizens Academy, and I have given thought. Councilmember Beltramini long ago and passionately spoke to a desire to have community members actually provide answers to some of the challenges we face. And when I look at all of the different advisory committees and we read their minutes and so on, I think a more active task group, period. As you mentioned, Mayor, perhaps some graduates, we've had over 200 Citizens Academy graduates who have complete training in all the departments of the city and the way it operates. I think it would be outstanding to, as a, you know, on a task basis. Many of our volunteers now don't want committees which just meet for no purpose, but who would meet with a charge to help us face some of the challenges. What would you be willing to do without? What revenue do you see we could find? And use the power of that brain, the power of the many people who show those concerns on particular charges, much as we did with Futures, where people would come and meet and then participate in that fashion and then share with council in that way, rather than monthly meetings or with summers off or however they choose to do it. So that it's a really good use of time, certainly for staff, and an immediate contact with us on where people are and what their opinions are. So I think in looking over this, I don't want the impression to be, well, we're just getting rid of a bunch of things. I'm hoping that we're morphing it into a more active workforce from interested community members to help us grapple with some of these decisions.
And the other thing I think is important, that if we decide that we're going to do away with some committees but do other types of venues for people to get their input out, that we didn't value their service and the purpose that they were originally formed for. I see some committees down here that, for example, the Troy Days Committee, because we're not doing Troy Days this year. The Youth Council, I think that it'd be important that we have some youth members that want to come to a different kind of committee on a specific task.
Sure.
But I don't know that the Youth Council necessarily has to meet just as a youth council. Again, same thing with Persons for Disabilities, the Committee for Senior Citizens, the Animal Control Appeals Board. I see a lot of the committees that are listed here that I think they continue to meet just because they've always met and they continue to discuss the same kinds of things. I don't see them serving the purpose that they were originally intended for. Councilwoman Beltrame?
Well, I guess, as you go alphabetically, and that's a way to organize your thoughts, do we need the animal control board anymore? We don't do animal
Right,
control.
that's why I'm
Peacock
saying.
Farm is closed. I don't even think we need to offload into something else.
No, but I'm just mentioning some committees that I myself think we can do without, and then we can ask if some of those people want to serve in some other capacity, they can. I don't know why we have the Cable Advisory Board. The Ethnic Issues Advisory Board. And I know we need to keep the Historic District Commission. I don't see why we can't combine some of the people from Historical Commission with the District Commission. We had to keep the District Commission because we have, by state statute, have to do that. But I think that the Historical Commission is by ordinance.
Could we just?
Yes, I'm just rattling off here
Yeah.
because we're not getting anywhere on subtracting committees. So.
Oh, okay, so
Go ahead, Councilor Kerwin.
Well, I'm just wondering if we could walk through. I mean, we have the whole binder, and I thought it was interesting.
Right. You want to go through everyone one by one?
Yeah.
Okay, go
no,
ahead. Go ahead.
No, I mean, because that was the way we went through the
All right.
rules.
Okay, you want to go back to Advisory Committee for Persons with Disabilities and go around the table and indicate if you think we should.
Well, I'll just have a discussion on one at a time, but
All right.
we were just really going fast.
All right.
And we talked about the possibility for persons with disabilities. If planning was something, is there a way to incorporate them? I'm not saying, Councilmember Beltramini pointed out it's a mayoral appointment. However, we also have other people serving on planning, like a student rep, not a mayoral appointment, but someone who's like a youth representative who sits there. But there should be an opportunity, perhaps staff would look at ways to ensure that, as Mayor Pro Tem Fleming mentioned, regarding transportation, would that be a smart bus? Would it be a way to incorporate that without continuing to have a committee per se meet, but having the value of that perspective addressed? And if that were the case, then I could see not having that committee.
I'll certainly talk to staff about that.
Any others on that one? Councilman Howard?
The advisory committee for persons with disabilities, it says 96 hours. I think they only met 4 or 6 times in the last year. And I was curious as to where the 96 came from.
I know the instruction to staff, if I may, Ryan, was to not just delineate time spent sitting down in the chair. It was the preparation time, developing the agenda, having the meeting, and then essentially executing the recommendations thereof for the committee. So it's much like what I would do with the city council. Much time I spend on council matters is not restricted to the time I just sit around the table.
Right, and to dovetail with what we discussed about 20 minutes ago, I think more important, I mean, clearly I think there are some boards and committees that can be combined, and some that we may not need anymore. But I think when you are dealing with something where there is a perceived need, say for example senior citizens or disabilities, then I think what we need to do is to ascertain what the minimum that staff needs to do, and if there's a way that some of these other items can be given to the board and committee as a whole, so that we can and perhaps put time limits on the meetings, reduce the number of meetings, and be fairly structured in that way, so that the people that these boards and committees are supposed to give a voice to do have that voice. But it's not a waste of your staff's time either. I think it's really important that when you're designating staff, that their time is used to the maximum, and they're not sitting around and the same thing is being rehashed 6 times over 6 months. And you can do that, again, those things I think that we talked about.
And I'll be happy to do that. I'll talk to staff members tomorrow about their respective committees that they work with, just to crystallize the mission of the committee and how often they need to meet, and if they could work in conjunction with other staff members, with other committees, to coalesce some of these committees, so that we don't lose anything, but we make more efficient use of our time.
Councilman McGinnis?
I'm having a little bit of difficulty going around the table, I think, and going through each of these committees as we have listed here. We had a lot of information, and the thing that I kept noticing, and I don't have as much time on the council to use as reference as some other people do, but if you really look and see what the committees were charged with doing, I mean, there's some very specific things that are listed here. And I have to tell you that as I was reading this, and I'm looking at some of these things that committees are charged with doing, I'm thinking in my head, if we really got that feedback and that was in a report, and that was a mission that every time they had a meeting, that was the focus and they were reporting back, I think maybe things would seem a little bit different. But there are specific things in there, whether they're outdated. I mean, some of them were outdated, and that's not anyone's fault. But you've got the let me see where this is at. The Ethnic Issues Advisory Board. Some of the things that they were specifically tasked to do in there, to come up with a resource book for all the organizations in the city, and obviously to work on a specific part of Troy Days that was a big project at the time it was created. Those things are not even things that they can be tasked to do anymore because they've been completed. Or in the case of Troy Days, that specific language in there is no longer applicable. But the idea of having an Ethnic Issues Advisory Board, I still think is very important. So right now, as we're sitting around the table, if I had to just go through and look at what each one of these things, each one of these boards or committees was tasked to do, and compare it with minutes, which I did from when I started, and see that that's not lining up at all. And I'm sure that there are many reasons for that. But the fact of the matter is, it's not lining up. And we don't have the extra staff and the manpower to kind of serve at the whim of the committees that aren't following what the original direction was, that we've got to make some decisions there. But I don't know if I really feel comfortable saying, let's get rid of this Ethnic Issues Advisory Board. I think in some sense that we've talked about earlier, of different ways that we could put a committee together to get different kinds of input from all these boards and bring it to us in a little bit more unified fashion, give people tasks that we're asking them to complete, that they feel comfortable knowing that we've asked them to review something. If they're going to spend their time going to a meeting and really working on it above and beyond what they're required to do, that they can feel comfortable knowing that we're going to actually be reviewing it. I think right now we're kind of out of touch with that process. So you may have some committees that are operating in a more efficient manner than others, but I guess what I'm concerned about is making sure that in deciding we're cutting something, where we're ultimately going to put that. I think that's a decision that we may want to flesh out a little bit more, and I don't know whether that's through going back to the committees and the staff and specifically asking some of those questions, or coming up with a group of people that have gone through Citizens Academy or that kind of board, and then figuring out what we might be able to replace with that kind of board and committee versus what we might be getting rid of today.
Well, it's my feeling that for many of the committees that we have that are not by statute or by charter, that they've kind of drifted off from their original goals and purposes that were set, because they have a meeting, they come together, they feel like, well, we've got to do something because we're here at the meeting, so they kind of like talk about things that they want to talk about. And I think it's up to us to set that direction for them. And if we feel that a committee is not meeting a purpose that we really need to have them and taking up staff time, that we need to say, we think these committees should keep as that committee. And I'm not saying that some of these people that are serving on those committees wouldn't serve on something else if we design it. They could. But I think it's kind of sad when you look at what they're originally charged for and what they're doing, as you say, when you look at the minutes. We're not having committees just to have committees. Councilman Kerwin?
As an example, when you look in the tab for Advisory Committee for Senior Citizens, in the resolved, it does say the purpose will be to study and make recommendations regarding facilities and services for senior citizens, including estimates of cost and sources of funds for said facilities and services. And really, that's the role on the Park and Rec Board. Councilmember Beltramini brought it up earlier. There is, in fact, a senior citizen sitting there to look at those specific charges. It's the perfect blend, really, in terms of those things. And that's where it started in '74.
Councilman Beltrame?
Madam Mayor, I think each of us, when we're given a 3.5-inch binder, has a different way of attacking it.
Yes, we do.
And it brings a very interesting discussion when we all come back and try and share. And I will tell you my methodology in this. Yours was, okay, statute, and then, okay, prioritizing. Mine was to look at all of these, and the very first note I wrote at the top of my sheet was, if we aren't using it, why do we have it? I mean, and that's kind of where I started. And so I understand the Economic Development Corporation has issues, but their bylaws say they meet annually to elect officers. They haven't met in
a long time.
8 years that I know of. So if we're going to keep these boards, they need to function in some capacity. And the Economic Development Corporation actually can do more than they're doing. They don't have to sit there and just have their obligations. And other communities are using their Economic Development Corporations because of lack of staff these days. So there are things that board can be done. The Municipal Building Authority was started to build this building. Okay, we paid off this building. What are their obligations now? Do we need them? Do they? What do they do? So those are the kinds of things. And then I looked at, is there an interest here that doesn't need to be represented? And I found that really there wasn't. But these 26, 27, however many double-digit committees we have, were formed over the years, much as our structure was, when we were siloed and everybody was a specialist. And now we need to flatten not only the professional organization, but our volunteer organization. And that's why I say, all right, figure out some interests that would be compatible, that could use their influence in other ways, and put them together on a committee for this. And I think you're exactly right. The Historical Commission handles the museum, the Historic District Committee handles the historic districts in the town, of which the museum happens to be one.
Right.
So can those not be combined? And that's the exercise I did in my head. If we're not doing animal control, do we need animal control? I don't think so. Could the traffic committee, if we're still doing, have you collapsed the customer service center, or is Beth still doing that?
Beth still receives telephone calls and attributes them to the appropriate person or department.
Well, and the reason I ask about that, piggybacked on the traffic committee, is the traffic committee basically handles things. If they don't come from staff, they come from a citizen out there that says, you know what, I really want a stop sign, a yield sign, whatever. At which case, that call could go to Beth, because the traffic committee, in essence, reviews staff's opinion and then brings it to us. So we don't need a committee to do that. We really don't.
Your Honor, if I may?
Yes. Mr. Zerline?
And thank you, Mrs. Beltramini. You mentioned something that I was going to mention, and that is there is a strong relationship between the structure of our organization and the committees that our employees sit on. And we are currently in the midst, as you know, of a restructuring of the entire organization. We can take a look at, as we restructure, each committee that targeted department works with, and see what the fallout is, if it's going to be a hybrid department, or if it's going to be left in situ, in which case there is no fallout, if it's going to be privatized or regionalized, and let you know what that impact is for those committees that are established by resolution and charter. or I'm sorry, by ordinance.
Ordinance.
We can do that. I can do anything that you'd like us to do in terms of a methodology. One direction we could take, though, is to look at our restructuring and see how that correlates with the department, the committees that the restructured department works with, and what impact that has. We could also take a look at it independently, but if we restructure a department and have a staff person assigned to that committee who's no longer going to be there, then it was premature to do it in that fashion. We are going to have as a study item next council meeting, I think that's what, July 12th? Of the engineering department, very big department, and wanted to have council aware of what we're doing in that department to be most cost efficient and effective. We could certainly toss in at that time the traffic committee, which is served by Bill Hooter. It used to be served by John Abraham, who was a traffic engineer. And like you said, Mrs. Beltramini, we are getting away from specialization to being generalists now, which will impact the mission statements of our committees.
Well, I think that's exactly right. The only thing that, in my mind, that Beth couldn't handle, traffic committee does, is sidewalk variances. But why can't those go to the BZA like all other variances? So.
Yeah, they could.
But then, I mean, you add up the hours, planning spends over 1,000 hours, that's half a person. That's half a person, and we're in a 2-person department there. So.
That's one meeting a month.
Yeah, well, the BZA is 1 meeting a month, but planning is 2 or 3. So, and that doesn't include, you know, their ancillaries, the BRA, the DDA, the LDFA, those kinds of things. But it's half a person, so when we look at it that way, to your point, it's like, whoa, we don't got the staff to do that. So, yeah, you consulting with your staff and seeing how we can flatten our volunteer structure to better serve not only us as the legislative body, but you as staff, I think would be very helpful.
The other use is where we actually have active volunteers, and coming to mind is the Troy Historical Society. I mean, where they work actually and love it, doing some of the things that we have the other commissions. So not only is staff meeting a lot, but also, you know, the people who are willing and eager to do things could take on some of those roles, and I think that's a perfect plan. The other thing that comes to mind is Friends. Friends of the Troy Public Library, we know that the director meets with the Friends Board once a month and then meets with the advisory board additionally, that might be a blend as well, as people who are in there really passionate and making a difference, that these are blends that I think we should look at. Not just in terms, I agree in terms of flattening, but also in terms of the energy base, where you have a really high energy base of people who want to do some stuff.
Yeah.
Again, those are excellent comments, and we appreciate all the comments that are made, because boards and committees are a function of the city council.
Right.
And we didn't want to be, as staff, we didn't want to be presumptuous and say, you can combine these committees, you don't need that committee. We wanted to hear from you and take direction from you. I think Tony and whoever helped you, Tony, did an excellent job on this compilation to give you a start, and we'll be happy to take it any way you tell us to from this point forward.
Well, it does say right in the charter that, you know, there's serving, most of these committees are serving solely as advisory to us. And that's why I was taking my list, and Robin's right. I did look at the ones that we absolutely have to keep. And then I thought, well, now these others, and I started looking, and I thought, well, we don't even need this one anymore. For example, Animal Control's appeal, you know, and Troy Days Committee. And even though I loved having the Youth Council when we originally formed it, I see them working with, because they do serve on other committees, you know, we've got somebody on Planning Commission when they can meet it with their schedule. So I have no problem making little X's by some of these and saying, we really don't need this as the committee as it is now. But I do see a purpose in special tasks for a small committee. I don't see us having a big committee like we did for futures.
Well, I guess,
I
Madam.
don't know, maybe others do
I think
feel
in
that.
terms of a community conversation, that's a perfect core. I really think that Councilmember Beltrame was right in the terms that we need to have a community conversation in terms of solutions. And I think that's a valuable core to start with, because it doesn't have to take now let me tell you a little bit about the city. They have all that. They know all of that. So I would like to see something, Mr. Manager, in terms of that large group meeting for a few things. And we have brainstormed a number of different ways that could happen. And this is not a costly thing. So we're not bringing in someone to run a charrette. We're really just bringing some. That's just a good base, and I think we should consider that.
But I think their charge has to be specific.
I absolutely agree. I don't
Just
think-
as for these committees, they had a charge when they originally
At one time.
set up, and if they've met that charge, no longer need to meet. We just did away with the Historic District Study Committee the other night because they've already met their goal. So just to have a committee is not a good thing. Councilman Howard?
And to add to that, there is nothing that prohibits the community from forming an organization external to the city.
Right.
And, the committee that Councilwoman Kerwin is talking about could be one of those committees. The Youth Council could be another one. And they could send a member or members to council to speak on their behalf if there is something that, needs to be conveyed to council. And clearly, like the citizenry at large, the committee could send a representative or representatives to meet with staff in the appropriate departments if there's a critical issue at hand. So that's something else to keep in mind. And finally, I would add that the one that screams out at me for consolidation, the two I should say, are the two historic commissions, the historic district and the historic. And a tremendous amount of effort was conducted in the 1990s towards consolidation, and for a number of different reasons that are no longer, I believe, germane. It didn't happen. I think now is the perfect time, and I think that's an excellent area where we can streamline.
And I think that would have to go back for the reorg, because that is part of the reorg anyhow. And so that's why I think the Troy Historical Society, which is viable and ready. One thing I had a great appreciation for was a Parks and Recreation Board. Seems to me that right now, that core group, I like the way, the inclusion, you have a youth, not mentioned in here incidentally, that you do have a youth rep, was not included in the chapter. You have the school connection, just one school district, but the school connection and the city connection, the seniors, and so on. Right now, I think it would be very important to activate that committee, perhaps to bring on some more in terms of how to revolutionize, I think, Park and Rec. We know we've charged them with revenue, make revenue in order to survive. And I think having all these minds at the table, it's a really important time. So that one I think we might look at.
That's the Parks and Recreation
Right,
Board?
that's it.
More in chapter 27.
Okay. And if I may speak?
They seem to, yes.
Just so you know, we are taking a look at the entire maintenance function, which
Right.
includes the parks function of Parks and Recreation. When we're finished, it may just be a recreation department. And parks could be under Public Works, just so that you know. We're not there yet, but we're looking at that to consolidate all of our maintenance functions to streamline that operation as well.
I think you mentioned that in that article that was sent to us today.
Which one was that?
The latest article that was sent us, the
Capital
email.
communicator. Capital.
There were some errors in that article.
Yes.
Sure.
I wasn't saying it was completely accurate, I'm just saying you mentioned about Parks and Rec, but the other things. Anyway, okay, any other specific committees that you want to talk about? It doesn't sound like anybody's anxious this evening to say, keep this one, do away with this one, except the ones that aren't. There's certain ones I think that we really just aren't using at all. Yes, Councilman Slater?
I know we have to wrap this up, and maybe with some direction to management. It just seems to me that there's a department head for each one of these. Maybe they could see what they can consolidate each department head. Where you have the museum for 3, city clerk for a couple, planning, city manager. Each department could come together and see what they can consolidate. And I'm not so sure we can do away with the Animal Control Appeals Board. And I think the city attorney needs to review these boards of the committee that have ordinance. Because I don't think we can just say we can do away with them.
No, we'd have to have a change in the ordinance.
I understand that, but I believe there has to be an appeal process somewhere for the animal control.
Right.
So, just because you want to do away with it doesn't mean that maybe you can do away with it. So, it just seems to me that if we could give direction tonight to management, have each department head, whatever they oversee, see what they can consolidate, and then come back to us with some recommendations from there, and then we can move forward from there.
We'll be happy to do that.
Councilwoman McGinnis?
Another piece of direction, I think, if there's consensus that we should probably look at. We've got the list of all the hours, and I just think if there's a way to also look at how we can more equitably distribute the staff time when we're trying to figure out what we'll ultimately end up with, that would probably be helpful, and I think that probably goes along with what Councilman Howell said earlier about limitations on the meeting times.
Yeah.
You know, whether it becomes an issue too, where there has to be a set time that works for what's available, I think, rather than giving free rein about time, place, location, minutes, all those other things. Well, I think minutes might be already handled by the fact that it has to somehow be uniform between the committees, but I think that would probably be helpful to have those discussions at the same time.
I think that Mr. Zerlich said earlier that he didn't have staff doing this ahead because these are committees that advise us, but I think us having a discussion and indicating some things at this meeting has been helpful to the staff then looking at things. And some may feel stronger about certain committees and their purposes than others. Councilwoman Beltramini?
I think this needs to be a two-step process before it comes back to us, and normally. And I say this because those department heads know about those committees. And I started with, I don't see an interest here that doesn't have some merit, but I don't know that all of these interests need a committee. And so, as the department heads look at that, and as it then comes to you in a form of 15 reports, John, I'd like you and your staff to look at it, not only to the work distribution part of it, but what consolidations can be made, what things can we have other organizations within the community that are perfectly capable, but we may not directly control. There are places where we probably could give up that control and the town would be just fine. And so I'd ask you to look at those sorts of opportunities as well before you bring it back to us and say, this is administration's recommendation or whatever.
Okay, any other comments on this? I think this was a helpful discussion. Mr. Zerlich, do I say you're signaling?
Just, if I may, just to summarize, I took 5 general notes, and essentially, what functions can be consolidated? How often is there a need to meet? Take a look at revisiting goals and objectives of the committees. Look at the restructuring of the entire organization in conjunction with the committee structure. And then what can other organizations do in terms of taking ownership of the school and objectives? That may not necessarily be the city of Troy. Is that about sum it up?
I guess there was one more thing, and it was from Councilmember Slater, and he talked about the implications of removing a committee, not just ordinance removal, but
Right.
something else like that. Like, what if you did away with animal control? Who then would the appeals board be? Could it be staff?
Okay.
Or if you say, if you got rid of Chapter 13, would you in fact need a historic district commission? Something like that. Well, it's a question.
Right, because of the state statute, yeah, okay. All right, since we have, we're not gonna go to the other item tonight. We'll take public comment, if anybody has a public comment on tonight. Anyone who wishes to speak under public comment? Yes, would you go to the mic, please? Give us your name.
My name is Jack Witt. Good evening.
Good evening.
As you may know, there's been articles recently in a number of the newspapers, including one with a circulation of over 400,000, known as the Detroit Free Press, and of course it's online also. And the comments following an article recently, which was entitled "Troy Director Disciplined." Some of the comments, which again is distributed throughout the online edition, and obviously to the extent these articles end up in the print edition, the city has become the laughingstock of Oakland County and Southeast Michigan. That's one of the comments. Another one: the management of the Troy City Council are a joke. Another one: the stench from Troy City Hall is wafting out. Now, I don't know that these comments are true. Certainly they're not all literally true. But I think you put it in the context of the topic of the article, there is some truth to it. Of course, the article concerned the disciplining of somebody for expressing their opinion. That was Mark Stymack, I believe is his name. And you were talking about committees, and as a member of the personnel board of the city, I'm very concerned about this. Now, we can talk about it as an employment issue, employment law, if you will, which goes to issues of, in the event the individual's employment terminates, unjust discharge. There can be, that's a common law issue. There can be concerns with respect to statutory violations. Those can be state issues. They can, in some cases, be federal issues. But putting aside whether there's a prohibition on such a action, obviously it's concerning to me that we're disciplining somebody for expressing their opinion. Now this brings me to my other 2 points tonight. Apparently there is underway an initiative on the part of one or more members of council to silence others on the council with respect to their views. This notion of collegiality and let's not disagree with the majority. This is a very slippery slope. The next thing we're going to have is an initiative to require individuals to have their comments approved in advance. It's sort of unbelievable. This city is challenged economically. It's challenged structurally. It's challenged with respect to leadership. And we're going around trying to, on the part of at least some on the city council, to silence individuals. In conjunction with the city manager, there's an attempt to obviously not have dissent that's not comfortable, not have dissent that doesn't line up with what we want. Believe me, I don't enjoy coming in here to make such comments as this. You haven't seen me for 3 or 4 months. But apparently, the point has not been made. The city council, on balance, is not evidencing leadership. A lot of this goes to the city manager and the mayor and to other members of council. They aren't focused on the true needs of the city. They're focused on control. They're focused on trying to evolve to a situation where there is no dissent and where apparently they can get away with their own priorities without consulting the broad civic entity known as the citizens and the residents. I'm very concerned about this. If I'm wrong, fantastic. I'll be happy to be wrong. I don't think I'm wrong. Thank you.
Anyone else that wishes to speak under public comment? Yes, sir, give us your name.
My name is Benjamin Blazak. I'm sorry to waste your time on this. This has been going back since 2002. We received another ticket for our little nature area. My neighbor next door to me, I live at 761, and of course the 80-year-old woman on the other side who has been forced to take down her older pole barn that none of us complained about, who also had to cut, her so-called, hazardous weeds or whatever. This has been going on for a long time, and this is going to end. It's going to stop. I've been through everybody in the city. This is our last ticket. We found it on our front door. How many people in this room leave by their front door? What if the ticket blew away? What if I was out of town and I didn't show up on my July 8th for my court date? This is ridiculous. Who does this? I've got a stack here. I was going to put 6 of them together, but then I found out there was a special meeting. It's gone to absurdity. I'll make it quick because I know this isn't all that important, but unfortunately, it's got to end. I'm basically starting with 209. Back in August 29, 2003, my attorney had to send a letter to my neighbor, the one in between me and the 80-year-old woman, to stop cutting stuff, stop saying stuff about me. Let's see, it was sent to the city attorney going back in 2003. All kinds of stuff. I'll give a copy of this. I was going to give one to everyone. I just didn't have the time. Then last year, when I got my ticket last year, by the way, it was dismissed. And every time before that, when I supposedly have a weed problem, I say, wait a minute, a weed problem? How about this problem last year? You do not have an ordinance. My neighbor can pile up as much horse manure as he wants and compost it from 2,000-pound horses. I like the horses. I like the animals. We put up with everything regularly for years. Okay? Forget about the roosters crowing. Forget about everything else, right? We don't say anything. However, God forbid if I've got a few noxious weeds in my nature area. I literally have a letter here saying it's okay from the city that he can do this. And they're trying to do. I'll just go down. This is from last year, and this has been going on for years. This is nothing new. The amazing things I could do now. Oh, let's see. The sump and the manure problems, the original manure problem when I got, I think, my first ticket. And I said, oh, yeah, my problem with my weeds, how about that 6, or excuse me, what's more than that, 6-foot pile of manure. Then all of a sudden the city said, oh, forget about it. Your nature area is okay. That was the first one. And then the sump problem, that was done a few years later when, again, I had a couple rocks to slow down the erosion that was going through because it was being pumped and the sump wasn't being pumped out front like everyone else in the neighborhood had to do. The city took care of that one. I was guaranteed back in 2003, 2003, that it would be, that the manure would go into a dumpster and leave. That hasn't happened. By the way, the fact that you okay composting, it was supposed to be hauled out every 3 months. Of course, nobody ever came to check on it because, I like the animals, so I never said anything. I let it go. Let's see. In 2002, 2003, it was determined the city of Troy that no area in each area was not a wooded area. It was never cut. Letters sent to me by the city were rescinded. First time city employees came out in July 2009, everything was fine with my nature area. The second time I was visiting, suddenly there was a weed problem. I volunteered to cut the noxious weeds, but it wasn't quick enough because I only cut them off not quite 10 inches, and I went around because I want to keep it a nature area with Roundup individually. And so then I decided, well, How can we solve this problem? Plant trees. I planted trees. Suddenly the trees are gone. What a surprise in that area. Little area we're talking. We're talking an area about the size of this table, maybe a little larger. So I go back out, I buy a group of trees, I put the small trees down, I leave the pots right near them. The city employee comes out, gives me a ticket. I mean, when is this going to end? You know, if I want to build a pole barn, I build my pole barn, I had to have it 8 feet off the property line. His is 2.92 off one west side and the other side. I was refused to build a 2-story pole barn because they said they couldn't do it in the city. He's got a 2-story pole barn, and it was okayed. This has been an ongoing thing for years. And now I get another ticket, and now I have to go to court.
Did you say that you had been in to see staff on this?
Staff? Oh my God, I know everybody.
Later? No, I mean this latest ticket today because.
Oh no, I called. I'm done. This has gone far enough. Either it ends within, by July 8th, then I guess if it does, if my wife was upset, maybe it's time for legal action. I hate to do it, but this is ridiculous because basically I have enough evidence here. Proof. If I want to build a pole barn, I'll just go next to my neighbor and build it 3 feet from the property line. I can get away with it. And this has been an ongoing thing. And the only problem that I have on my property is some weeds because I try to keep a nature area so that the rabbits, the coyotes, the deer, whatever else has a place to live. Forget that all the manure is regularly flowing on and down. Once again, none of us want them to move. But it's astounding.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'll give you a copy of it. The rest will get copies. And
okay.
I'll give one to the attorney.
Thank you. Mr. Savage, did I see you up? Give it to the city clerk, please, and then she will distribute it to us. Thank you. Mr. Savage?
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, Council. I guess what I'm not seeing here is that everybody agrees, and this is nationally worldwide, that there has to be new approaches. But I'm not seeing new approaches. I'm really seeing business as usual. I'm not seeing a feeling of what do we have to do to turn the city around, what do we have to do to get confidence from the residents of the city. And I think the last speaker was an example of what is happening, is that there's a total disconnect between the residents of the city and the city government. Okay, that's one comment. As far as this meeting is concerned, there was a talk about the visitor comments at the meetings. There was started I think Mr. Slater says, well, he would like to have a comment on the visitor comments, which I thought was a good idea because that showed me that somebody was taking notice. However, too often, this went on to something beyond that. And I think one of the reasons was that the council member would ask Mr. Sirlag for his comments, and then the time was taken up, basically, on repeating what the city manager's position was. Okay. The other comment is, as far as comments on items on the agenda, what is difficult is that a person may want to comment on something on the agenda, but yet there's been no presentation. So when he's had his chance to speak on this, he may have a whole different view after the person has presented the presentation on that item. So it would seem that people wanting to speak on an agenda item would be far better served if it were after the item was on the agenda, and then that person may find that his questions are answered already. And probably that's about it. And well, an example, okay, of that is very often there's been a lot of people wanting to speak on, say, a development is coming up, and the residents are not very happy with this development. But they don't know the information because the developer hasn't presented his position. And so that idea of having to speak before the item comes on the agenda makes it very difficult. So you might want to consider that. Thank you.
Mr. Witt?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Sean Witt. I just wanted to comment a little more on the discipline of Mark Stymack, specifically reading from this Free Press article dated June 15th. The Free Press did an investigation, and they've concluded that a review of the city code, personnel rules and regulations, and an employee handbook did not tone up any policies that address employees making comments at council meetings. Further, when Assistant City Manager Miller was asked about this, about if there was any rule or regulation that prohibits an employee from speaking at council meetings, he said, "I don't know of anything specifically." And then the article ends that the City Council was notified by City Manager John Zerlag that he felt he had the right to take disciplinary action against Mr. Stymack. Well, I think there's a real disconnect here, and there's a real problem what's going on here. It shouldn't just be that Mr. Zerlag feels that he can do something. It should be based on the city's rules, laws, procedures. We have procedure to follow. We have rules to follow. We have ordinances to follow. It's not just that the city manager feels like doing something, he can do it. So I think that's a real disconnect that you're seeing all throughout the city here, and you can't just have city management running wild, doing what they want to do, totally without any legal basis or any ordinance basis or any rules basis or any direction from city council. We really have to remember the hierarchy of the city. Residents are first, council reports to the residents, and then the city management and administration reports to the council. That's the way it really has to be, and there has to be more accountability. I think we're seeing a lack of accountability here, and it's really troubling. Whether it be how much we're paying Mr. Carlisle for all this consulting, which we never had disclosed other than an hourly rate, whether it be how much vacation the city manager is taking, all this stuff is not being accountable to the council, and ultimately the council is not being accountable to the residents. So I think there's a real disconnect here, and it's really troubling when we have a city manager and city management that thinks that they can just take action, just tell the council, well, I thought I could do it, so I'm going to do it. No, there has to be legal basis. So if the city manager or any of the city administration has a legal basis for disciplining Mr. Stymack, they should release it immediately. They shouldn't say no comment or we don't know of anything or we just thought we could do it. They have to have legal basis. You have to have procedures and rules, because without rule of law, government just turns into chaos and it turns into picking winners and losers and playing favorites, and that's not the kind of city we need. Thank you.
Anyone else under public comment? We're asking for a clarification on comment. Mr. Zerlich?
Thank you, Your Honor. I normally don't respond to personnel matters, but I would like to indicate that the Detroit Free Press and the two speakers, the two wits, are incorrect in their comments that I disciplined Mark Stymack. I did not discipline Mark Stymack. There was a complaint against him, and I followed our standard protocol, and that's to put someone on administrative leave with pay, so there was no financial harm to Mr. Stymack. The result of that investigation that was conducted indicated that the recommendation not to engage in discipline, and I agreed with that recommendation. So there is no discipline of Mark Stymack. I don't discuss personnel matters, but any other matters you want to talk to me about how the city is run, I would rely on my staff and myself and not the Detroit Free Press.
Okay, council, then we're in adjournment.